All right, so before we get started, actually, normally we would do this in person. There would be like a little bit of an icebreaker. Since we can't do that, I actually asked our hosts today to start us off with a little poll. This is just fun. There are definitely no right or wrong answers here, but just curious to know, do you have enough toilet paper, and have you started baking yet?
I want to know the story behind the one person there was an attempt at baking. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Is that cool?
Let's see. Oh yeah, go for it.
All right, sharing the results.
Looks like we're all set with toilet paper except for one person. Maybe this should be a good group to message and be like, hey, got some toilet paper to spare. Wow, 50-50 between baking and not baking. That's interesting. Then one person with an attempt. I'm terrible at baking. And for all of you who have started baking, I'm really curious to know where you got your yeast, if you've been baking bread, because that's impossible to find these days. But yeah, that's oh, okay. Should look that up. Homemade starter from Jonathan. Okay, see, this is why I'm bad at baking. All right, so let's go back to design now that we know a little bit more about each other. Okay, I'm gonna jump right in because there's a lot of content to cover today. I'm gonna start with a quick introduction. I'm a product designer. I've been a design lead at Netflix for about 4 years now. I like sailing and generally being a water Pokemon. I like to eat and cook food, and definitely been cooking more lately. I like music, going to concerts. I dabble a little bit in electronic music, although, the concert thing, not so much lately. And who knows what other hobbies I'll take up while we're stuck at home. So our host today, Tech by Choice, and helping to moderate our discussion is Vanessa. She's a board member and an engineering manager, board member at TBC, an engineering manager at Elevate Security. She's also my wife, which is cool. And today she is the Roz to my Frasier. Okay, so jumping right in, what the heck is product design even? We hear a lot of different terms: UX, UI, interaction design. These are all disciplines that are awesome, that are in the digital design field, but they are all concerned primarily with the user needs. They don't really factor in the business needs as much. Whereas product design is more holistic. A product designer considers both the business and the user needs. So where, in this Venn diagram, on the left side, you would see, your UX and UI and interaction designers. Way off in the business side, you see someone who's solely focused on business is actually probably more of a product manager, less of a designer. And then product design kind of goes right in the middle between those two. So someone who can speak both of those languages. Okay, so what tools do product designers use? Lots of questions. So I would say almost channel your inner, 4-year-old. Ask as many questions as you can whenever you're starting a new project. And with that comes listening and speaking skills. So really learning to just kind of quiet down the solution side of your brain until you really understand the problem and understand what the other person is telling you, whether it's during a customer interview or whether you're listening or you're discussing things with your product team. And then on the other side of things, also being able to speak. So speaking to your design, articulating your design decisions, and helping sell your design. You know, if you feel strongly about a particular solution that you arrived at after a lot of discovery, you need to be able to articulate that solution using the right language to different types of people. And then also synthesizing. So, you know, when you're listening in on customer interviews, when you're talking to different project stakeholders, like your product manager, or, you know, your business developer, whoever it is, you want to be able to kind of listen and synthesize that information so that you can share that back out to other people. And then, of course, reflect that information in your design. And then finally, we get to Sketch, or really whatever design tool you want to use. Sketch happens to be the industry standard. It's widely used by a lot of kind of tech company teams. And that's for a lot of reasons. It's a vector-based tool. So if you're familiar with Illustrator, it's more like that in the sense that you can scale your design up and down really easily, as opposed to, say, Photoshop, which is raster-based. And so if you design in a particular resolution, you're kind of stuck to that resolution. It has a sizable online community. So if you get stuck or run into any problems, you can quickly find an answer. Plugins extend that functionality pretty well beyond the already awesome feature set that it comes with. So you can have it do pretty much anything from prototyping to red lines, which is like coming up with specs for your design, etc. And it's relatively cheap. So it's, you know, 79 bucks a year the last time I checked, as opposed to, say, Adobe Creative Suite, which is 79 bucks a month, I think, for their standard plan or whatever it is. And it replaces, honestly, all of those tools. As a product designer, I very rarely need to go into Photoshop. I call it my meme software. I just use it to make memes and then stick to Sketch for all of my product design. And then, you know, the downside of Sketch is that it's Mac only. So if you use a PC, don't worry. A lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today are transferable to pretty much 90% of the design software out there, of which I recommend Figma as kind of the PC equivalent to Sketch. It's a web-based tool, so it works on any platform. And it, in some ways, it's actually cooler than Sketch because it has a feature that lets you work with other people in the same document at the same time, kind of like Google Docs. But don't worry, you know, stick around. Don't leave the Zoom meeting. What you learned today will be transferable to other software. Okay, so we got kind of an overview of different tools. Are you ready to start designing stuff? Hold your horses. We still have a lot of questions we need to answer, like, who is even our client? And in this case, oh, the logo's not showing up, but you'll see it later, so that's okay. But let's say we got hired by an Oakland coffee company called Meant to Bean. And Meant to Bean, you know, they had a really solid customer base, and then coronavirus hit, and they had to shut down their retail store, and they're left kind of wondering how they're going to pay their employees, how are they going to keep all of those customers, you know, with whom they've built relationships over all those years. And so they thought, like, hey, why don't we build an online, an app that lets users continue to order coffee online. We can keep our employees on payroll. It'll help us kind of weather the storm. So the first question here, and I'm going to ask folks to type into the chat, who do you think we're designing for? And, you know, we'll give it like 20 seconds. And maybe like one of the hosts, like maybe Vanessa, you can read out some of the answers.
The business and the customer. Another answer, customers of the coffee shop. For the customers, customers and the coffee shop owners, customers and business, the user, coffee drinkers and business owners.
Okay, these are all solid answers. Customers is, that's the number one. Everybody talks about user-centered design, and that's our user. We want to make sure that we're addressing problems for the customer.
Ooh, supply chain.
Oh yeah. And then we have, engineers. So who's going to build our app? Because, we're not going to draw a picture and then the customers will automatically be able to use the app. We have to be able to build something that the engineers want to build. They're excited about building it. So when we design something, we have to also think about what engineers need, what are they trying to accomplish? We have to think about the employees of the business too. So who are the people who are roasting and packing and delivering all this coffee? Because our app is going to impact them as well. And in this scenario, we're kind of in this client designer relationship that's kind of like a freelance or an agency relationship. If you're an in-house designer at a company like I am, other people or other stakeholders that you might want to consider would be your customer service department, for example. If you designed a really cool feature, but it's really confusing to use, it's going to increase your customer service contacts, right? More people are going to call and say, like, I don't know how to use this feature. So you want to think about them as well. You want to make sure that you're not increasing their load too much. And then you get to the business owners, of course, and a lot of you mentioned that as well. And that takes us to the question of, what are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish with this app? A big mistake designers or new designers often make is they kind of form assumptions out of like what their client needs before asking a lot of questions. And I would say, it definitely doesn't hurt, and it would be required as a product designer to ask the business owner, what are they trying to accomplish? Because their goals, they have 20 goals and number 17 might surprise you. So the next question would be, after you kind of identify all of the different stakeholders in your project, is understanding what your business goals are. So remembering that Venn diagram, we're sitting right in the middle. We want to talk about business goals and user needs. For the sake of time today, and because it's really easy to find resources online for user-centered design, I'm not going to talk about the user needs here, even though in a normal project scenario, I would address both equally. There are not a lot of resources online for learning about the business side of things, so I'm going to focus on that in this presentation. So some of those business goals would be to sell coffee, grow the business, sell more coffee, make money. As a business, a lot of businesses want to focus on maximizing their profits. They want to keep their customers engaged. They've invested a lot over the years to build their customer base. And maybe they want to also, collect customer emails so they can market new products to their customers, send promotions. There's a lot of stuff that this business would want to do. And as a product designer, you and the project team and the business owners, all of the stakeholders, you have to decide which of those goals you want to actually focus on, because you can't do everything. You could have resource constraints, like you maybe only have one engineer and you can't build a really huge app and really complex app because you don't have a lot of engineers who can build it. Maybe it also affects your design. So if you're trying to solve for all of those business goals that we mentioned, you'll end up with a really, really messy design that users won't figure out how to use. So being able to prioritize these goals would be important. And then there's also measuring success. So what gets measured gets done is sort of the cliche, but that's certainly true for businesses. And so you want to be able to understand, even as a designer, was the design that you built, that you designed, successful? Was the app worthwhile? And so again, I'll turn it back to you. What do you think are some ways that you can measure success against those different goals that we mentioned. So selling coffee, making money, getting emails for marketing. How do you measure whether or not you accomplish those goals? And again, type into the chat.
Increase sales revenue, survey score from customer, more users of the app, user conversion, increase sales by measuring new customers, do JAD sessions with Agile, ability for business owners to get meaningful data, email open rate, number of sales, conversion of users that sign up into actual usage of the application.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, those are all great. Each of those different metrics will tell you something different about the experience that you designed. So a lot of you mentioned, the number of sales, like how much are you selling? And that could tell us, if we accomplished our goal of selling coffee. If you're talking about making money, it could be revenue per week or per customer or per order. Average order size is a very common way for e-commerce companies to measure their success. Keeping customers engaged, a lot of you mentioned app downloads and different screen visits. I really like the idea of a survey. I think that's a great, one of you mentioned a survey. That's a really helpful tool. It can also help you identify reasons why customers are doing certain things. A lot of these success metrics, they'll tell you if somebody did something or not, but you won't know why. And then, collect customer email addresses for marketing. You can measure the number of emails that are collected or how many people convert, like some of you mentioned, from, to providing their email address from just browsing the app. So these are all valid ways of measuring your success, and it's all about sort of what you want to prioritize and what's important for the business. And these are all things that you would want to clarify with the business owner who, if you're in an in-house team, that might be a product manager, you want to clarify those goals and metrics with them. So before we even open Sketch, we have to answer so many questions, do a lot of discovery, and that's going to make our design process much simpler once we actually get into Sketch. We don't have to go back and forth and constantly check in with people as we're designing. Okay, so after having a meeting with the project team and the different stakeholders, we decided we want to focus on two goals. We want to make money so that we can help keep the employees on payroll, and we'll measure that with an average order size. And we want to keep customers engaged. We don't want them to forget about us during the pandemic, and we want to make sure we can communicate with them during and after the pandemic, let them know the store has opened or whatever. And we'll measure that by number of email collected. Okay, so we know our goals, we know how we're going to measure them. Are we actually ready to jump into Sketch now? Yes, let's jump right into Sketch. I feel comfortable. I have enough information to go on. Normally, there would be a lot of user research that would kind of fill that left side of the circle, the user needs side of the circle. But we're not going to get into that right now because we're trying to keep this short, and we'll focus a little bit more on Sketch from this point on. So I'm going to stop share while I switch apps. All right. All right. starting screen share again. And all right, so I started Sketch. When you open Sketch for the first time, you see something like this. We're going to click on New Document here. And okay, can everybody, before I continue, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's get familiar with the layout of Sketch first before we do anything. So if you've used any kind of design software before, this might look a little bit familiar, but also pretty different. Sketch does things a little bit differently than, say, Photoshop or Adobe XD. At the very top here, you have your basic tools. You can also customize this toolbar. So, you know, as you get more and more familiar and you develop your own workflow with Sketch, you'll customize this toolbar as you go forward. For me, I like the default setting. The only change that I make is I actually add the rulers. So I use the view tool right here to show rulers. And rulers are a really great way of adding guides to your design. So you can like add a guide. This won't actually be included in your design, but it'll be for you to kind of align things correctly and make sure everything is nice and neat. Let me get rid of this for now. And then on the left-hand side here, you have layers and components. We'll get to components a little bit later. Layers are split actually into two sections. At the very top here, you have your pages. So you have page 1, page 2. This is not your actual design. These are not your, pages of your app or website. This is just for organizing your designs in Sketch. So here, for example, I might add a page for my wireframes. I'll add a page for my visual designs, etc. You could also do like different flows, so like sign up flow or a home page or whatever, depending on how you want to organize things. It's a kind of a personal preference. Let me get rid of this one. Below here is once you start adding designs, layers will automatically start populating. If you've worked in Photoshop before, this is very different kind of workflow. In Photoshop, you make the layer and then you put your design in it. In Sketch, you make a design and then it'll automatically create a layer for it. And I think when we first started using Sketch as the product design community, everybody was like aghast at this whole concept because they thought it would lead to a lot of design files being unorganized and mismanaged. And I say, so what? Because the customer doesn't care if your layers are aren't named properly. That's my own personal opinion on it. I know a lot of designers might disagree with that, but I like to focus on the things that the customers will actually benefit from, not necessarily get too caught up in the organization. The only exception is if I was working on the same file with a lot of other designers. So I want them to be able to look at my document and make sense of it without me having to explain it. So in that case, I will name my layers begrudgingly, but otherwise I'm a total mess. Okay, and then we get to this panel on the right. I'll explain this panel in more detail once we start designing things. But this is essentially where you color things, where you add shadows in different styles, arrange things. So we'll get to all of those tools once we start designing. Okay, so without further ado, let's start designing stuff. So what we want to do is make a mobile app, right? It's let's say it's an iPhone app. Let's say we did a survey and we found out that most of our customers use iPhones. So we want to make sure that we're designing an iPhone app and not an Android app so that we can actually serve our customers. And so before we start committing things to pixels to the screen, what pages do we need? So if we want to make money and we want to collect emails, We make money primarily by selling coffee. So I'm just going to type out the screens that we need. This is not going to be in our actual design, but just as a way to help me organize my thoughts. So we need definitely some kind of home screen that contains a product list, maybe some way to search and filter, sort through that list. So if I only drink light roast coffee, I don't want to see any of that medium roast stuff. So I need to be able to filter that out. And then, maybe we want to add some kind of like email sign up feature. We don't know what it is yet. We haven't started designing. And then, we want to have like a product detail page. So if I really want to learn more about this like medium roast coffee that I saw, I'm going to click on that and get some details about it. There's going to be some more stuff in there in that detail page that we'll get to in a bit. There's going to be a checkout flow at some point. And, as we're kind of outlining all of the stuff that we need to design for, just kind of keeping our business goals in mind as we do that. So in today's presentation, we'll be focusing on those two screens and primarily on the home screen. That's going to be the bulk of our work today. And we're going to use some kind of sketch magic to be able to quickly port that over to the second screen and kind of establish a design library for us so that we can easily create more and more screens. Okay. So I'm going to start here. One thing to note is I actually switched on this. It shows what keys I'm pressing on the keyboard. And that's because I work really quickly in Sketch. I've been using Sketch for, I don't know how many years. And I got really comfortable with the shortcuts. And I realized that's a really key part of being kind of an efficient product designer, is really learning the keyboard shortcuts. So I'll try to remember to go to the use the GUI whenever I can to show where you can find things. But you can also see what keystrokes I'm pressing, like A for artboard, that will so you can know how I'm doing things. So I'm going to start my design by adding an artboard. Okay, so an artboard is essentially everything within that artboard is what the user will actually see. That's our actual design. All this text that I wrote here, that's not going to make it to our actual design. Kind of consider it a scratch pad. In Sketch, it's called a canvas. And so the artboard is really kind of your screen that you're designing. By default here, when I click A, or if I go to Insert and Artboard, I'm going to get this panel here on the right-hand side. And this panel has a lot of presets for different devices. So I can design for an iPad, different types of iPads, different types of phones. There's all kinds of like Android devices. You can design, like if you're a social media manager, they have presets for different kinds of social media posts. We're designing an iPhone app, so I'm going to stick with that iPhone, and I'm going to pick iPhone 8. For me, that tends to be, you want to design for whatever is most common. So, if you have a survey or something that tells you what kind of phones your customers are using, that's great, do that. If you don't, and you can always kind of do secondary research, look online, see if all of our customers are in California, do most people in California use iPhone or Android? I don't know. You kind of want to look that up and kind of base a decision on that. For us today, I'll use iPhone. So it drops this artboard in Sketch for us. It names it iPhone 8 for us here. It has a size. We won't mess with this too much, mainly because it'll mess with our design. If we change the width, say, to 400 pixels, that's not going to be helpful for us. We want to make sure that our design fits into the iPhone screen. And then once we put that artboard in, we'll also see that it showed up here in our layers. Also, the text showed up in the layers, but you'll see that the text is kind of free floating. It's not in anything. Whereas, say, if I add a rectangle, it's going to automatically nest that in my artboard. Huge difference from the Photoshop workflow where you create a layer and then you put your rectangles and your pictures in there. Just because I probably shouldn't perpetuate bad habits, I'm going to name this layer home, or this artboard. And I'm going to put all of our home wireframe, the home wireframe design in here. So what did we say we needed on our home? Well, we needed a product list, searching, sign up feature. And of course, we need like a navigation bar or something. You know, when somebody opens the app, they want to make sure they know what app they're in. So what I did here was I hit R to bring up the rectangle tool, and you'll know you have the rectangle tool because your cursor changes to this crosshair with a square on top of it. You can also go to Insert Shape and Rectangle, and you have all of these other shapes in here as well. It'll automatically make a rectangle for you with a gray fill and a dark gray border. You can change those presets in your settings. I tend to keep them the same because they happen to actually be perfect for wireframing, which is what we're doing right now. So I'll select the rectangle, and I'll actually move now to the right-hand panel here. There's a bunch of different options that we can change with our rectangle. We'll go through those one by one, based on things that I actually use versus features that I probably never used, which I won't mention. You can change your border radius. So let's say we can play around with this, make it super round or keep it straight. This is a wireframe. I don't want to get too deep into the visual design just yet. I just want to lay out my content, know how my content is going to look on the page. So I'm going to put this here. I'm going to make the height about 64. That tends to be a pretty good rule of thumb for iOS. Rule of thumb is a pun. You want your users to be able to use their thumb on your app. So this header needs to be clickable with a thumb and not too small where you're accidentally going to click other things. We're probably going to want a logo in here. So for now, I'm just going to put like a another rectangle. I'm going to call it logo, just for me to know that eventually I want to put a logo in here. I'll select this rectangle, and here you can easily duplicate things by clicking Alt and then clicking on the object, Shift, and then dragging to where you want it to be. And the cool thing about pressing Shift is it'll keep things aligned for you horizontally, or if I press Shift and went down, it'll keep it aligned vertically, whatever axis you're dragging across or along, and it'll keep things nice and neat for you. Another neat trick using the Alt key is select any object and hold Alt, and it'll show you the distance from that from the edges of that object to the edges of your artboard. Or if you hover over another element, the distance between the objects you have selected and the element that you're hovering over. So very handy if you're polishing up your designs, making it really precise. This is something that you'll use a lot. And Sketch will automatically also just snap things for you. So I'm not clicking any, or not pressing any keyboard keys here, but Sketch is automatically just aligning things for me and showing me how I should make my design neat. So I'm gonna put this here, and I want this to be like a shopping cart icon. I just want to lay it out for now. I don't want to worry too much about it, but this is kind of the general header that I'm shooting for. We talked about having some search and filter options. Normally those go on top because you want to give people a quick way to search without having to do a lot of work. You don't want to bury the search under a lot of other pieces of content. So normally I would go to this website. I actually use Material Design Icons a lot. Material is a design system that's made by Google, and they have an accompanying icon set that is really comprehensive. Like they even have icons for legroom for airline seats, which is fascinating to me. I don't know how many designers need to use that, but okay. Weird flex, but okay, Google. That's, you know, it takes a certain type of designer to want to design your icons from scratch. All the power to you. That's not me. I like to use icons that other professional icons designers have made. So I'm just gonna go and look for shopping cart. So they have a bunch of different options here. This looks pretty good. If I click it and download SVG, that's going to be perfect. I actually already have an icon in here in my folder. So I'm just going to go into, oh, it's right here. And get my icon. This is going to be the only time today that I actually go to material design. I actually have all of my icons already downloaded to my computer. So I'm just going to drag this over just so I don't forget that I meant this to be a shopping cart icon later. And then I also want to add some search and filter features, the ones that we talked about. So I'm going to grab the search icon and the sort icon. And that's going to be, those are going to be my icons for now. Again, I'm kind of keeping everything aligned. I'm not hitting anything on the keyboard. Sketch is just automatically aligning everything for me. One thing you have to be careful with, you can resize things. So once you select an object, you'll see this kind of border with different squares all around. Normally, you can resize things just by kind of dragging them along these different things. I wouldn't recommend doing that with icons because that's going to mess up their pixel perfection. They make everything kind of align on the screen pixel really well, so they look nice and crisp. Instead, you can go to wherever you got your icon and try to find a different size that's better for you. So even though it is vector-based icons, you probably don't want to mess with the sizing of it, and instead just download the correct size from the source. So I'll align this here. I want my entire design to be to have like a 24 pixel margin around the side. Just as a best practice, give it enough of a breathing space and to keep everything nice and aligned. So I'm being consistent with my margins. And then I will hit T, or if you prefer to use the drop down, you can go to Insert, Text, and I'm gonna add some text here for search. Let's get into some of these text styles. I'm actually going to switch this to Helvetica using this panel here. Just because I don't want to get too bogged down right now with fonts and colors and any of that stuff. Normally in a design process, you might want to present those wireframes to your client or to your team. And if you present visuals too early, people will start saying, oh, I don't like this color. Why did you use this image or that? And you're trying to get feedback on, you know, whether the search feature makes sense here, or maybe it's another thing, or maybe you should put it somewhere else. So what you present is what you'll get feedback on. And so I recommend if you want to get feedback on content and layout, even if you already have a visual design, try to make it black and white first so people are not getting distracted by all of the different fancy things that you have in your design. So I'm just going to nudge this here a little bit closer to the icon. So I'm using this is a design principle called chunking. So if things belong together, then you want to put them close to each other. So here, let's say I want to put this about 4 pixels from this. So it feels like if I click the icon, then I know I'm clicking search, etc. So that's my kind of search and sort area. Let's say I'm not happy with the way they're aligned, so I'm gonna select a bunch of them, and then I'm gonna go over here to this strip of tools. And this is kind of like your arrange tools. You can arrange different elements This lets you, these two let you distribute the elements equally. These let you kind of, put everything, align everything to the artboard and or center everything to the artboard and to each other. You can align them to the top, align them to the middle, or to the bottom. I'm gonna choose to middle align them, and that actually looks pretty good. So I'm just gonna leave that as is. Okay, moving on to our content. We're selling coffee and we need to list our coffee products. So I'm gonna make some cards. You've probably seen this design element a lot, where you make a card that has an image and some text and maybe a button included. So that's what we want to create here. So I'll start with a rectangle. Let's make this white because it's gonna have a bunch of different stuff in it. So I went to this right-hand panel here, where you'll see this fill section, and you can change the fill to a lot of different things. You can use colors. I'm gonna shy away from colors just for now. You can use gradients. Please don't use the gradients that come with this app or with any app. The stock gradients are almost always terrible, and they're just meant to show you that gradients are a thing you can do. And it takes a lot of work to like really master gradients so they don't look awful, which is probably why flat design is a thing now. But for now, we're just doing wireframes. So using a plain white fill. You can also change your border. You can change the way that your corners appear on your borders. We're not gonna mess with any of that just yet. We're just gonna stick with this plain white rectangle. I'm gonna make it an even 200 pixels, and that will be our the height of our card. So it's gonna be 330 by 200 pixels. It'll be a nice height. But oh, look at that. Our margin on the left is not correct. So I'm gonna change that a little bit. So it's, I'm nudging it here. And this is 24, this is the culprit. Okay, so now everything is aligned, hopefully. Okay, everything is neat. Okay, so what else are we gonna put in this card? We need some kind of picture, so I'm gonna draw another rectangle. We don't need to put anything in there just yet. We'll just know that we'll put a picture here. We also need to name, add the coffee name. A lot of these, Sumatra, whatever, coffee, like Yirgacheffe. I'm not like a super coffee person, but I do know about this coffee called Kopi Luwak, which is from somewhere in Indonesia, and it's actually processed through the intestines of some kind of sheep. But it's supposed to be delicious, so maybe one day I'll try it once we're all out of here. I'll make this pretty big. I want people to know, what they're buying. So I'll put that here. I want to make my internal margin 16 pixels. This is based on, these numbers aren't arbitrary. They're based on I think it's called like an 8-pixel grid or something. But basically by having consistent margins and paddings in all of your design, it will make everything kind of seem more cohesive. It'll make it seem like there's a rhythm to the design. So that's something that, you want to kind of keep in mind. So all of my margins and paddings, I'm going to try to keep them 4, 8, 16, 24, etc., kind of following that rhythm. And what I did here is I duplicated again. And what I want to add is a price. So let's say this is $16. And this probably doesn't need to be as big. Probably not that small. Okay, that looks about right. And I want to keep this about 4 pixels from the other design. What else are we going to need here? We want to keep customers kind of coming back to this app. So let's say we want to give people a way to favorite things. So I'm going to add this icon, the other one actually. So this favorite with a border. And, you know, it'll give people a way to, hey, maybe I want to come back to this later. I'm not ready to buy right now. And then let's see, we'll duplicate this again. Again, make it probably 16 is a good size. Command B to toggle bold on or off. And okay. Let's see, this is 16. I want to change this so it's 16 on both sides. So I'll go in here and kind of just keep nudging it using the right-hand panel so I can get 16 on all sides and it looks neat. So let's say this is a single origin. I can bring up my emoji panel to put a bullet. And then medium roast. Normally this content would be, you know, how do you decide what content to put in your card? This is exactly the kind of thing that you would rely on user research for. Otherwise, it would just be based on what I care about. And I'm not the user, I'm not the customer. Maybe I'll buy some coffee from my client, but I'm not their customer. You would want to use user research here to really understand what your customers care about so that you're putting that content front and center. Actually, I went back on and I want to make this a little bit smaller again. Okay. Okay. What else is missing here? We need a way to be able to actually add this to our cart. So let's go in here and grab this icon again from material library. You know, things don't always work out the way you intend with the grid, but it's okay. I'm okay with it. It's generally kind of the right alignment. So even if this seems a little bit closer to the edges than other things, that's fine. So we have our basic card. And this is easy. Like now that we have this, we can continue to build on it. So I can quickly just duplicate this. Again, I want to keep that vertical rhythm going. So I'll do this. If I hit Command D, it'll automatically create another one for me and it'll put it in the right spot. So you can quickly come up with a design there. What I actually want to do now is, remember one of our goals is to collect email addresses, but it's not our primary goal. So I don't want to put it somewhere at the top and kind of confuse our users, but I also don't want to bury it in like an account or a settings page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually move all of this stuff a little bit further down. I get rid of this since it's not going to be shown. I'm going to add a little panel here. That's going to be our kind of email sign up panel. Actually, I think we'll have enough space for all of that stuff. So I'm just going to move this here, make our panel a little bit more clickable. Okay. Cool. So I want to give people a way to sign up, give us their email address. There's a lot of ways you can do this. You could put a sign up field, like a form field right here. You can put a button. This is not the absolute most important thing for us to do. So just being on the home screen is probably prominent enough. And so what I'll do is I'll just make it a little bit of a panel. You know, maybe say something like sign up and stay in the loop on store updates. I don't know, I'm not a writer, but this kind of conveys the general idea of what we're trying to accomplish with this panel. Okay. And you know, we want to add a button so people can actually sign up and do things. This is where I'll go in here and let me disable the border. So I'll click this checkbox and I'll change this fill to, also, I'm sorry about my cat. Let me fix that real quick. Okay, he doesn't like that the door is closed, so. Okay, we're just gonna add sign up here as a, as our call to action. We want users to be able to sign up. This is not the actual color that we'll use, but it's just a way to show that this is a different thing from everything else and it's more clickable. Okay, now we have a basic wireframe done in a relatively short amount of time. It shows how we intend to address our business goals and the user needs that we just came up with, using Sketch. And now, normally I would kind of share this for feedback, whether with my team, other designers, just to kind of check in as I'm going along, to make sure that I'm on the right track. You don't want to spend too much time designing, especially when you get to visual design, and then realize that you're doing things all wrong. So check in early and often with your team, with your client, with your different stakeholders to kind of make sure that you're on the right track. You'd be surprised how many people, if you set the right context for the feedback that you want to get, you'd be surprised how willing people are to look at wireframes or even just hand-drawn sketches. If you just let them know, like, hey, I just want to know, like, am I on the right track or not? So don't feel like you have to be protective over your design until it's absolutely perfect, because it is never going to be perfect. Okay, we have our wireframe. Let's say we shared this with the client and she loves it. This is exactly what she's looking for. No changes are needed. This is an amazing client who is perfectly happy doing whatever the designer wants. And now we're ready to move into visual design. So I already made a visual design page here that I can move into now. And so what I'll do is I'll switch to that page. I don't have my artboard anymore. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can copy and paste this artboard here. You can do that either by clicking on the name of the artboard here in the canvas, or let's see, I wanted to collapse this. I can click on this and go to visual design page and paste, and it'll do the same thing. Different ways of doing things, whatever you're comfortable with. You can base your visual design on the wireframe, or if you choose to, maybe you want to give yourself a little bit more freedom to go outside of those margins and paddings and everything that you came up with in the wireframe. You can just choose to use your wireframe as a reference and design something else entirely. I'm just going to base it on the wireframe. So I'm going to take every piece here and turn it into a visually designed piece. I'm going to add that UI layer that we talked about earlier. Okay, I got rid of the other card, and that's because everything that we're going to design visually into the card is going to be based on this card right here, and then we're going to duplicate just like we did before. These are all of the unique elements that we have on this page. Okay, so let's start with the header first. We usually don't want to have just a gray header with the word logo in it, so let's get rid of that. We don't need it. And my client is actually really organized, and they sent me their logo in vector format, and it's already in Sketch with a lot of different formats. This is amazing. So I'm just gonna drop this in here real quick. It doesn't look like this will fit, so wait, let me see. Okay. We have a horizontal icon that is probably a better fit for this screen. So let me do that real quick. Paste that in here. I don't need this whole artboard that it came in, so I could just drag it out of the artboard, get rid of this, and then drag it over here. Okay, we have our logo in here. It's beautiful, it's perfect. The margins are not great, so I'm gonna fix the margins a little bit. When you're wireframing, it's totally fine to be kind of a little bit lax with your margins and your vertical rhythm, but once I get into visual design, I like to be a little bit more of a stickler when it comes to the margins. So I'll set that up. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna leave that here. I don't want this header to be gray, so I'm gonna get rid of the border and I'm gonna change the fill to white. And I wanna add some drop shadows, give the app a little bit more of a sense of depth. So I'm gonna click shadows here. And let me actually make this a little bit bigger. Okay, center things a little bit better. Okay. Okay, so back here, the default drop shadow is really harsh. It's super dark and it just looks like an overexposed photo. So I'm gonna tone this down a little bit by clicking on this square here or rectangle. And I'm gonna tone down the alpha. So alpha, that's our opacity. And I'm gonna make it really transparent. I'm gonna set it to 12. It's gonna give me that nice drop shadow, happy little trees. And let's say I want this to be, again, I have this rhythm in my head of like all the different sizes. So I'm gonna make this into a 4 and the blur into an 8. X and Y here is your offset. So is your shadow going to be offset to along the Y axis, or is it going to be offset along the X axis? For me, there's a lot of designers that really care about having a single light source for their designs, kind of like when you're doing a painting. And that's generally a good practice. There's something as a user, even if you can't put words to it, like the design will seem off if it looks like you have light sources coming in from all over the place. So it's generally good practice to be consistent with your light source. You can add multiple shadows if you want. So you can add another one. Let's say we want this to be even softer. So we'll keep the alpha at 12, but we'll make the offset 1. And maybe we won't have a blur. We'll just kind of keep it basic. But you can add a lot of different shadows. There is a material design library that comes with Sketch, and material design is really famous for being very thoughtful about the Z-axis and like the sense of depth that they have in their design system. I can actually show an example because the material design library comes with Sketch by default. So you can grab different elements here. This is actually great for wireframing if you want to just grab stuff real quick and not have to draw rectangles from scratch. But you see how like they have their shadows all set up really thoughtfully. They have multiple shadows with like different settings on them to give you a different kind of depth and based on the type of element. So their cards have a harsher and smaller shadow, while an element that's supposed to be even more highly raised from the surface has this kind of deep shadow. But that's too much for me. I'm happy with my 2 shadows on my navigation, so I'm going to stick with that. For the search and filter bar, search and sort, I'm just going to keep that really simple. I'm just going to stick with my clean kind of vertical rhythm. And I'm just going to update the visuals a little bit. Let's say our client has they like to use, let's say this font called Avenue. Let's say this is their kind of corporate font that they use on all of their materials. So we'll want to use that in the app as well if it is suitable for an app. So here I just made that not bold. I changed the font using this panel. I'll probably want to change this. I don't want to just have like plain black icons. I probably want to change the color, make it a little bit softer. So let's go into our color panel. And I'm gonna go a little bit in depth here. In the color panel, there are global colors that just kind of come with the panel. You can also use this slider to change your color and select whatever you want. We're kind of working within an existing brand system. So I don't want to just use any color. I want to have the same set of colors that I use throughout the app. And to do that, you can use your eyedropper tool. If your client has a predetermined like color swatch set, you would use that. But our client doesn't. They're a small coffee shop. It's great that they even have a vector version of their logo ready for us. So I'm just going to grab their colors from the logo. So let's say I want my primary color, the one that I use for calls to action, for buttons, that sort of thing. I want it to be this pink. It pops out. It looks great against this white background. And I'm going to make that my primary color here. It would be nice to have like an accent color. So I'm going to use the eyedropper again and go into this like deep purple, like very Prince purple. And I'm going to drop it into my little document panel. So you have your global colors and your document colors. And then I probably want to have some kind of like a range of grays that I can use in my app for like text, or maybe a secondary button that I don't want to kind of compete with my primary buttons. And in this case, I could use those grays for my icons as well. So for that, I'm going to show you a neat little trick that, if you just use straight up gray, your app will look kind of dull. But what you can do is just make it add a hint of color, if you will. And that will really help kind of bring your design together so it all looks like it belongs together, and it doesn't look like, oh, here's your colorful stuff here with the pinks and the purples, and then like you have your drab gray icon somewhere. So if you just add a hint of color to it, it really help it come together. So that's what I'm gonna do here. This looks like a pretty good contrast. On contrast, I would normally, once I have kind of a good visual design going, I'd want to test the contrast to make sure that people can actually read it. I have relatively good eyesight, once I have my contacts in, but otherwise, but there are a lot of people who maybe have contrast problems or are colorblind. So you want to make sure your design is legible for everyone who goes to your app. There's a big movement around inclusive design. And so there's a lot of tools out there that will help you look at your design and like apply like a filter, kind of like an Instagram filter to your design to see, hey, can a colorblind user read this? Can they differentiate between the different elements? Is the contrast enough for someone with say like not great eyesight, etc. So for me, this looks pretty good. And I'll click this plus icon again to add my gray. And maybe I'll want like a darker gray as well. So I'll go a little bit deeper. And I have my two grays that I will use. Okay. So that's going to be my icon gray. I have another icon here, so I'll apply that same gray color to it. Okay, I want the light gray for the icons. So I'll do that here too. Cool, now we have our search bar. Now I want to get into this, this card here. So there's a few things we want to do. I want to establish kind of a border radius that I want to commit to throughout my entire app. And I'm going to go to, again, the right-hand panel here. This is where you set your border radius, and that will allow you to round your corners of your cards. So I'm going to go in here and press 4. That's going to be my border radius throughout the app. So this is a situation where, remember that gray rectangle that we added here? It doesn't have a border radius. And we want it to have a border radius on the top, but not on the bottom. So I'm gonna select it again. And kind of similar, if you're familiar with CSS, this is pretty similar. It starts in the top left corner and it goes clockwise. So I'm gonna press 4, 4, 0, 0. So it's gonna have 4 pixel radius on the top corners and 0 pixel radius on the bottom because I wanted to have that straight bottom. And now we have a nice border radius that, follows the rest of my card. So that's done. Let's see, what else do we need to do? We need to give this maybe a little bit of a shadow, just like we did with the header. So I'm gonna make this a 4 and this an 8 again, kind of committing to that same shadow style so everything looks cohesive. And I don't want this border, so I'm just gonna get rid of it. Yeah, looks better without the border. There's a lot of subjectivity here, it's okay. Let's see, we need a picture of coffee, maybe. Hopefully our client sent us some coffee pictures. No coffee pictures, because my client, who is me, forgot to add the picture of coffee. So I'm just gonna Google some coffee pictures, which is totally okay. Nobody sue me, please. Okay, this looks pretty good. I'm gonna put this here. And at the end of the day, it's fine. You can use whatever you want. This is just a way to illustrate that we will have a picture here. What picture exactly, we can figure out later. Oh God, what happened? Okay, so I just copied and pasted a picture. It's gigantic, so I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. So you can zoom out using Command minus, zoom in using Command plus. And then I'm just gonna click Alt or press and hold Alt on my keyboard and then drag, Alt and Shift. Shift will keep the proportions intact, so you're not gonna stretch your image and make it look weird. This looks enough for me, and then I'm just gonna put it here, but this looks not quite right. I'm going to teach you a tool that is probably one of the tools that I use the most, which is masking. And this is something that is a feature in pretty much any kind of WYSIWYG editor. But here I'll select the rectangle, the one that we just adjusted the border radius on. And I'll also select the photo, and I'll go to the mask feature right up top. I'm going to click that, and it's automatically going to put my picture or have it like be cropped to the shape that's underneath it. So the image that I want to crop is on top. The mask, the shape that I want is at the bottom. You can use any shape. So I can put a star here, and let's go to my shapes. And I'm going to draw the star. We'll go here. I'm going to, if you mask this, it'll still work. But we're not going to do that, actually. Maybe I should have used the heart. Oh, well. That's okay. We'll stick with this rectangle for now. But that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to select both elements using Shift. Holding Shift and selecting different elements will select all of them. And that'll change this in your panel. It'll show you where the elements are different. So we have different font sizes, different weights, and it'll also show you where the elements are the same. So they're both using the same font. They're both using the same color, which is correct. That's actually how I want it, except I want the font now to be the font that we just decided is our company font, and I'm going to change this color to white so it's easy to read. Another thing here is it's really hard to read this $16 on top of this really busy background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my, I'm going to go into my bitmap layer here. See, I have not actually touched my layers at all. They're just a mess, which is okay. But I'm going to select this mask. Actually, we'll do this a little bit differently. I'm going to go into that same group. So this folder icon means that this is a group. It automatically named it bitmap because that's my picture. I'll be good and name it coffee image. And then actually, let me also add these two in here. So everything is grouped together, and then when I move it, it all moves as a single element. But I also want to add like a background to make this text easier to read because it's now kind of difficult. So I'm gonna draw another rectangle. Basically, this entire class is how to draw rectangles in Sketch. I'm going to drag this in my layers. It'll automatically put it on top, but I want it to follow the same mask. So I'm just gonna drag it and I'm gonna put it on top of my coffee picture. So now it follows the same mask. And now I can play around with it as much as I want. I'm gonna get rid of my borders and I'm gonna add a gradient to it. So right now it's this gray gradient. That's not what I want. I want to have a black gradient. And what I did here is I did black to black, but what I will do is the top part of my gradient, and you can kind of change how your gradient works by kind of playing around with this tool here. I'm gonna leave that part as is, but I'm gonna change the top part. So I'm gonna select this node. And I'm gonna change it to really transparent. And now it's like, I can see that there's a picture of coffee, but it makes reading the text much easier. Okay, what else do we have here? We have our icon, our little heart icon. So I'm gonna select that, change it to white. We have a defined icon color for like this sort of thing, but this is on top of a very dark background, so I want it to contrast really well, so I'm going to change it to a white outline. And then for this shopping cart icon, I'm going to use my primary color. Why? Because our main goal is to sell coffee. So I want to make any button that allows the user to add something to their cart just pop off the screen. I want them to like immediately go to that icon. So I'm gonna make that like this kind of hot pink color. I'm gonna change this to our color here. This looks pretty good. See how like all the text is like the characters are kind of far away from each other. I want to fix that a little bit. There's usually a science to these things, but I tend to eyeball it. So 0.28 sounds good. So let's just go with that. Okay, this is shaping up to be pretty cool. Let's see, what else do we need? So we have our icon, we have this, that. Let's also start working on our banner. But before I do that, I'm gonna switch my headphones because my battery is about to run out. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you for dealing with that. Okay, let's do our banner here. And that's going to be one of the last things that we do for our visual design for the home screen. After that, it's all easy. So we'll select the background here. I'm pretty happy with the size of this banner, so I'm gonna keep that as is. I'm going to use the border radius that we just decided we're gonna stick to. I'm gonna change this color to say like this. Ooh, that's way too dark. So I'm gonna go up here a little bit and make this a little bit lighter. And hey, you can always add another gray. You're the designer, you get to decide these things. And then I'm gonna change this to all caps. That'll make this button really pop out. Let's see. This is gonna be kind of a primary button on this page. So I'm going to change this fill to our pink, and then I'm going to give the button a border radius as well. It's a pretty nice looking button. I want to click it. I'm gonna make the size a little bit nice, so it's kind of nice and even all around. And then I'm gonna change this over to, see, now we're starting to get into like poor contrast territory. So I'm hoping I can, it looks like we need a darker gray for our text. So I'm going to go a little bit darker shade of gray. And let me add that to my palette so I have, I can keep using it throughout the app and I'm not like randomly selecting different gray colors. Let's actually organize these colors here so we can move this around. So we can go from dark to light, and that'll keep things easy to find in the future. Okay, so we have our basic elements of our page. Congratulations, everybody. This is awesome. If you're designing kind of a complex app, what you want to do next is you want to make it easy to take these elements and drop them into other pages. Let's say you have another search page, or you want to have different configurations of that search page. So you want to use a feature of Sketch called symbols. Symbols are, if you're familiar with programming, it's kind of like creating a variable, or like an object, or if you're using, if you use, what's that thing everybody likes, React components. Symbols are kind of like that, where you create your base symbol, and then you have all of these additions that go into it, and you can easily drop instances of it everywhere. So let's do that. Let's make a symbol out of some of our elements here. Before we do that, I'm going to change my shopping cart to gray, just to be consistent. Much better. Okay, so let's make our header into a symbol. So I'm going to select everything in our header. Then I'm going to go up to this create symbol button up here. There's a bunch of stuff in here. Send symbols to symbols page. You want that checked because, I mean, it's up to you, personal preference, but for me, I like having that symbols page because it makes it easy for me to see all my symbols in one place. But it's going to keep an instance of the header on your main design. So this isn't called rectangle, it's called header. So I'm just going to name it header and then create. And now this is a symbol. I can select it. It'll move as one element. The difference between a symbol and a group. So we already saw a group earlier. A group, you can't have a master version of that group and then drop instances of it everywhere. That group is its own instance. Whereas a symbol, you have your master symbol, and then you can have instances of it based on different needs. Let me change this. Okay, I'm going to show you what that means right now. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to duplicate the symbol. So I'm now in the symbols page. So when I created my first symbol, Sketch automatically created the symbols page in my layers panel. And this is not like anything that your engineer will see, like your users will see. This is just a way for you to organize your symbols. So I want to duplicate this header. I'll keep the logo the same, but I want a version of this header to show when a user has added something to their cart. We want the user to know when something is in their cart. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here and change this to header slash cart with things in it. And now when I go to use symbols using this dropdown, I go to document, and now I see header and header with cart with things in it. So I have two versions of header. Interesting that it didn't nest it for me. Should have done that. Is it backslash? Oh, I know why. Okay. Header, cart with nothing in it. Sketch can be finicky sometimes. Now when I go to symbols, it's still not nested. Okay, things don't always work out the way you want them to. But what I want to do is change this icon to a different color to show that something is in it. And I also want to show the number of items that I have in my cart. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to change this to pink. The reason is when someone has items in their cart, I want this shopping cart icon to pop out, and I want them to be attracted to it. I want them to go and click on this and go through the checkout experience. And then I also want to show the number of stuff that's in there. So I'm going to zoom in real close, and we can see, till we can see like the actual pixels here, which will help us align our oval shape to the icon. So I'm gonna, if I hold shift while I'm making any element, it's going to make a perfect circle or a perfect square for us. So I'm gonna make a perfect circle, the same exact height as the shopping cart icon, and I'm gonna change this to the pink fill, and then I'm going to move it about 4 pixels. And then I'm going to add some text in here to show that there's something in the cart. I'm going to make this the same width as okay, that looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is just make sure it's aligned vertically as well. It can be really tricky to do that. I'm just going to eyeball it, and it looks pretty good, so I'm just going to leave it as is. The next thing I want to do with this header is I want to make it easy to resize. So we're designing an iPhone app today, and it's for iPhone 8. But what if this design, if I wanted to scale this design to say an iPad, or I wanted to use the same design for like a different size iPhone screen or for the landscape view. But I don't want to have to redesign everything all over again. So what I'll do, symbols will allow me to, I'll select all of the things that I want to make the changes to. And here I can actually use these resizing rules in the right-hand panel. So here I could say, I want this to stay a fixed size. So I'll select that. So this will stay a fixed size. And then here what I'm saying is, when I'm resizing, pin this element to the left edge of the entire header. So I can resize it, to different widths, but the logo will always be 24 pixels from the left edge of the header. And then the same thing with this icon. First, I want to group these together so that they always stay next to each other. So Command G to group, and created a little group for me here. I don't want this to like get all wonky when I change the size, so I'm going to say again fixed size, and I want to pin it to the right edge. And the same thing with this, except I don't have to group it. It's already there by itself. I'm just going to pin it, and again, fixed size. This doesn't always work the way I want it to, so I'm kind of crossing my fingers here. But what'll happen is I can resize, and now if I want to make this into an iPad app that's much wider, it's really easy to take that same header and drop it into the new app design, and your client will be amazed that you turned the design around so quickly. And you'll be like, yeah, it was so hard. It took forever. Okay, what else? Oh, the other thing is, now that we have 2 versions of that header, and let's say we wanted to show our client a version of this screen with something added to the cart. So I'm going to select the header, and then I'm going to go in here, and then in this symbol panel in the right-hand side, I have the ability to switch to a different header. So that's the purpose of nesting things in your symbol library, is because it'll keep all of the things that are the same together, and then I can have now I can switch to cart with things in it, and it'll automatically show what the header looks like when I have items in my cart. And you can use that same technique throughout your entire experience, including with your icons. So this is an example of the icon when it's active. This is an example of the icon when it's, you know, inactive or gray. So you can create symbols for all of this stuff. We're actually an hour and a half into this class. So I'm going to show you, I'm actually going to do the cooking show thing. And I'm going to pull out the design that I already had for this project. Let me save this design real quick. Sure, this is fine. But I'll switch to the designs that I already had prepared so that I can show you the prototyping feature. Okay, open cloud document, that's it. So Sketch has a Sketch Cloud feature. This is what the app, you know, could look like once we have everything set up. This is a detail screen that I designed using a lot of the same elements. This is an example of that card that we designed, but with, you know, this is a variant that has, oh, it shows me that I already added this coffee to my cart. I kept the add to cart icon here so that, you know, just because you have one of it in your cart doesn't mean you can't add more. So just thinking about our goals, and, you know, we want to increase the average order size. We want to keep users, we don't want to keep users from buying more stuff. And in a similar way here on the detail screen, we want to, you know, once they're on the detail page, the primary action is to add something to your cart. So it's the only thing that's purple. It stands out from everything else on the screen. But then once you added something to your cart, we also want to show you maybe what other people have liked. So maybe you came to the app thinking all you wanted was this coffee, but we'll show you other stuff too. And maybe that'll increase, you know, you'll be interested in those stuff, you'll buy them and increase the average order size. So instead of just spending 16 bucks, you just spent $21. So those are a lot of like different tricks that you can, not tricks, but, you know, different tactics that you can use as a designer to help you achieve your business goals. The reason why I'm kind of going through this as well is I want to give you some kind of context about like how do you present your designs. Design presentation is an entirely different class. It's a whole other kind of can of worms. But I'm going to tell you one thing, like from a lot of a big mistake that I see a lot of designers do is they do they give what I call the real estate tour. So they'll open up their design and it's a great design, but they'll tell you, okay, here we have a logo and here we have a card and here we have a sign-up bar, but they don't tell you why they made those decisions. They don't tell you how it's going to help your business. So my biggest piece of advice for you is when you're just presenting your design, you need to articulate why you made those decisions and how those decisions are going to help the stakeholders achieve their goals. If you're presenting to an engineer, you're going to tell them like, hey, when I designed this, everything, all the fonts and colors are consistent. So it's going to be really easy for you to make React components or whatever it is that engineers do out of the designs. So you kind of also tailor your presentation and the articulation to differently based on who you're talking to. Okay, the last thing I wanted to go through is the prototyping feature. So in Sketch, built into it is a feature to create prototypes. It's not like fully baked, which is why they don't show it by default. But you can switch on prototyping tools. If I can, there it is. Add link to artboard. So I'm going to move this here to make it really easy for me to add stuff. And then hotspot. Okay, those are mainly your prototyping tools. They're color coded in Sketch. And when you make a prototype, Sketch automatically uploads it to the cloud. So I want to show that if you click on a card, it's going to go to the detail screen. This is an extremely simple prototype. I'm just going to select my card. I already made a symbol out of the card in this particular file. And I'm going to click my link button. That's going to give me this like little wiggly line. And I'm just going to hover over the screen that I want this to link to. And now when I click on a card, it's going to take me to that screen. I'm going to do the same thing here with this card. I'm going to link, go here. And now both of those, it's really nice that it keeps that connection visible so you see where your different elements are going. Let's pretend that we have a sign up screen designed, but I want to show that you have to click the sign up button to open the sign up screen. So instead, you can use the hotspot feature to create this sort of invisible hotspot that's not going to show up in your design when you export this and show it to your clients or whatever, but it is going to work in the prototype. So I'm going to connect all of these, and then once I have my connections in, I can go into the panel on the right hand side, and you can change your target here for based on the hotspot or the element. And you can also change the animation. So how does the other screen transition in? So let's see, no artboard animation. You can slide from the bottom. Basically, the only options are sliding in or out or no animation at all. I'm just going to keep the default selection, and then I'm going to hit preview. And now when I click here, it's going to go back. I can also go here, add another hotspot so that when someone clicks on the logo, they go back to the home screen. Click preview again. Now, when I go back, I can easily go back and forth, etc., etc. You can get fancy with it. And if they're going back to the home screen, you can have it slide in from the left. And that's pretty much as fancy as prototyping with Sketch gets. Before we go into Q&A, I want to show something else that's really important about with the symbols, and that's the ability to change the text in your instances. So here, not only can you select different symbols, for different situations. So here we have a card without this kind of badge that shows you if it's in your cart. We have one that has it. You can also change this to say like Sumatra, and this is something else or whatever. Maybe this costs a different price. This is like $13 or, but you can change all of this text in your symbol, but it'll only change that instance. So wherever you have that symbol elsewhere, it'll stay with the text that came with it. You can do the same thing with images. So let's say I go here and I choose this coffee cup image. I can paste it in here, and now I can easily create like a very rich looking experience very quickly and very easily. You can do the same thing with icons, select different icons, swap them in and out. You can also switch off different elements. So the way that I did it here is, let's go to try and find this. Oh, because it's a different card. But let's say we only had one card symbol, but we didn't want to, I don't know, we wanted a kind of card that doesn't have this icon in it. So what I'll do is I'll go to where the icons are, and you can choose no symbol, and it'll disable this add to cart icon from here just for that instance of the symbol. When you go into your symbols page, it's going to keep everything intact for you. Okay, I'm going to go into, that was a lot. You're gonna get this file. Vanessa and the team are going to send you a nice package with the file and the slides in them, so that you can use that as reference. And I think you're also gonna get the recording of the session, so you can easily follow along. really digging into this file will help teach you a lot. And like, you can't make mistakes. Like I said, what customers actually care about in the end is what they get to use. This is all just techniques and tactics for you to be able to articulate your designs well, and for you to be able to work quickly and efficiently. So some takeaways from today. Product design is holistic. You're considering not only the user experience and the app UI, but you're also considering the business needs. Product design is really all about decision making. If you, like, I was thinking out loud when I was doing that whole design, and that's really what goes through the mind of a product designer as you're going through things. You're trying to weigh kind of the pros and cons of going with different different visual styles or visual treatments, how the content is laid out, and you're trying to make sure that you're addressing your business goals when you're making those decisions. And if you design something that maybe doesn't address the business goals and maybe goes more towards the business need, being able to really articulate that to your team and advocate for that if those two needs clash. And you know, how to tackle that problem is also a class in itself. Let's see. This, I think, is just a duplicate slide. So Sketch is a powerful tool, but it's just a tool at the end of the day. It's, you know, design software varies very slightly, but the techniques that you learn today, they can really apply to any other tool that is out there. And it's interesting. Start by defining goals and success measures. So stay humble. The reason I say that is, you know, often, especially if you have a graphic design background, I know my own graphic design curriculum really focused on making us feel empowered, making us feel like design is this, just, it opens up the doors to like being able to influence a lot of people. And that's true, but at the same time, you have to stay humble and understand that I'm not the user and I'm also not the business owner. And those two groups of people have needs that are different from my own, and you have to learn to empathize with those people. And then design efficiently. You know, a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, like with symbols and prototypes, they're not always appropriate. You know, for an app this size, I might make symbols, but I probably wouldn't make a prototype just because it's so simple. You can easily just kind of grab images and send them to your client. You don't have to make a prototype. So, you know, use those features where it's going to make you less efficient, but don't feel like you have to use every tool that you're aware of with every project. Okay, and let's open it up to questions.
Thanks, Ghaida. Wow, that was awesome.
Thanks.
Someone says, this was amazing. Thanks for your time. I'm graduating from my boot camp in July in UX UI engineering. What would you say is the most important thing I should have in my portfolio to stand out to companies?
I would say that it's not really a type of design that you need to have in your portfolio, but the thinking behind the design that would be good to like really start thinking, why did I make those decisions? How did they help the business? And so you could, you know, whether it's a website or an app or whatever it is that you have in your portfolio, put together a case study. Even if you don't put that case study in the portfolio, a case study can help you review the work that you did and understand the reasons for why you did it, even if at the time those reasons weren't quite clear. A lot of these decisions that we make are sometimes pretty intuitive, and you just kind of make them as you go along while you're doing your design. But going back and kind of reviewing it and reflecting can help you articulate those decisions to other people to show that, you know, you have reasons for doing things and you're not giving that, you know, real estate tour that I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Nice. Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, I guess no one has any other questions. Great. I posted the YouTube channel link from links to our past webinar videos. We'll be posting this one sometime tomorrow. And
it seems like we have some questions in the Q&A section.
I wasn't looking there. Thanks a lot for your time. I just graduated from my UX design bootcamp and looking to break into the industry with my first role. Do you have any advice on navigating the search in these times? Can you share your story getting to your product design role?
Sure. Also, marhaba Ayman. I saw your LinkedIn post, but I didn't get a chance to respond yet. Thank you for coming to the session. So I did a BA in graphic design back in Saudi Arabia, where I was born and raised. That was about 12 years ago. And I started out in advertising agencies, mainly doing a lot of web design work. So I would work on the web design component of the ad campaigns that the agency was working on. And then in 2012, I came to California to work at a company called Zerb, where I worked for 3 years. And that was kind of my first introduction to product design, rather than simply, designing websites or whatever. I spent 3 years there. I learned a lot of techniques, and then I moved into change.org, where I learned all about A/B testing and kind of designing as an in-house designer. So not that client agency relationship, which is very different when you're working in-house. There's a lot of politics when you're working in-house, not in the sleazy sense, but just, in the people sense, like understand, you really want to get to know people. It's a lot of relationship building when you're working in-house. Whereas, as an agency, it's a little bit of a different dynamic. I can't really give advice on searching for roles in these times, specifically during the pandemic, just because it's so different than anything I've experienced. I think I was really lucky because when I my UX career and my product design career kind of evolved with the discipline itself. I think when I first graduated college, there was no such thing as product design, and that really became part of the nomenclature only about 5 years ago or so. And I think actually a lot of these companies here in Silicon Valley kind of helped shape what that role is. But it is a fairly new thing. I don't know if I'm the one to give advice on how to search for a job right now, because I haven't been looking for quite a few years. So that's probably something that's maybe better for the folks in the chat, to kind of share tips with each other, if there are other people who have experienced that recently.
Yeah, I'd also say hopping on to an open source project and lending your talents and developing your talents there, and then putting, even though you're volunteering, putting that real work in your portfolio and your resume can really help fill the experience gap if you're newly getting into this. And open source projects usually very excited to have design help. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Someone asked, what's something as an engineer we can do to drive better design for users?
Yeah, so the way that I work with engineers, it either terrifies engineers or it really excites other engineers. So it depends on the kind of engineer you are, I think you would be the kind of engineer that would be excited to work with me, because I give a lot of leeway for engineers to make their own design decisions. And that's because I'm a big fan of like coming up with design principles and then letting other people make the decisions. I don't have to be in every meeting for every project and, you know, designing every single thing. In a lot of projects, I'm perfectly happy working more as a consultant to the engineer who is really driving the design. I would say the main thing for an engineer is to just get a foundational read into what are the principles of design in general, like things like the 80-20 rule. These are the kinds of things where, like, as a designer, I may have had lots of years of experience following those principles. You know, things like chunking that I mentioned earlier, where, you know, if things are supposed to work together or they're supposed to be next to each other, you have to chunk them together visually, put them close to each other. Those are the kinds of things that I would say to look into. There's a great book called Universal Principles of Design. It's every principle just gets its one page in the book, and I think it's about 100 principles, and you could just like pick it up and flip to any page and quickly learn about that principle. That's one of the things that have helped me a lot when I first started UI design. And those are the kinds of principles that you can apply really to anything, not just to digital product design, but to any kind of thing that you're designing.
Cool. And someone asked, can you put the prototypes in a website? I don't know if they mean these prototypes to view or in general. Can you put prototypes on the website?
You can. So actually, I can maybe show that real quick.
Okay.
Let me share my screen again.
I think we have 5 minutes till our Zoom closes.
Oh my God. Okay. Let me go in here real quick. Let me see if I can do that in less than 5 minutes. All right. Sketch, don't fail me now. Okay, so when you click on Cloud, it just so happens that I'm actually logged into my Sketch Cloud, but you might have to log in or create an account first. I think it's free, but then you can go to View on Cloud or copy a link. I'm going to say View on Cloud. It'll automatically open this up for me here. I need to sign in to actually be able to see it, but there are share settings. You can copy a link and send it to anybody, and they can view it on the website. And I think it's even like it works on a phone. So if you're designing an app, they can look at it on their phone.
Awesome. Thanks. Wow, this was great. Thank you so much, Ghaida.
Yeah, no
and
problem.
We'll be sending out some more materials after this. We'll be emailing through Eventbrite or Meetup, whichever way you signed up. Right, Ghaida?
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And then, yeah, I'll send book recommendations as well as the sketch file that I have here, so you can dig into it and learn more. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. All right. Bye.